everyone, my name is Nathan Jones, and if you're new here, welcome. I like to talk about all things movies, specifically Blu-rays, and welcome to my film journey, where each week I cover the things that I have been watching and picking up, all things physical media, mostly movies, and I have been having a blast. This is week 45, and just yesterday I actually put up week 44, so if you are curious to check out my previous journey, make sure to watch that. I normally put this out each week, but instead I had a really crazy couple of weeks, so I decided to do a double episode. So this whole weekend is a double feature. First episode, we talked about the television series I had been watching for the past few weeks, and then also my pickups and my birthday haul. So it was a really fun couple of weeks, the last few weeks. And now we're going to be jumping into the movie side of it, where I have covered quite a bit of ground in terms of the things that I have in my collection. Some new things that I want to talk about. There's quite a bit of horror that I actually started to watch. On top of continuing the Columbia Classics line, I decided to watch the entirety of Volume 4, except for the Starman TV series, which is the bonus disc in that set. But we'll be talking about that down the line as I decide to watch that. But regardless, it's been really fun doing this, and as we're approaching week 52, which is probably going to be the end of this experiment, I am excited to kind of restructure some of the things that are going to be going on this channel and figuring out what that looks like. But I'm still in the film journey mode, so that's what we're going to be doing today. And let's continue with some movies. Before we jump into all of these, I would love to know in the comment section down below, what movies or television series have you been watching for the past few weeks? Have you been watching Andor on Disney Plus? Have you been watching some streaming services? There's quite a bit of stuff that I am amiss from, that I am just not catching up to modern day stuff as I'm watching some stuff in the past. But I would love to know what you've been checking out, so let me know in the comment section down below. Alright, so let's start off with some oddballs, because I decided to watch these 3 random films. One of them I just recently picked up. In fact, I just talked about it a few weeks ago. I actually watched the film Truffle Hunters. The Truffle Hunters, which is a documentary about a bunch of older guys in the, I guess the Alps, I think is where they're out. They're in Italy, so yeah, I was close. And how they are the ones who are collecting these really expensive truffles, and along with their dog companions. So I didn't know what to expect from this film. I didn't realize it was a documentary. I remember watching the trailer some time ago and not really thinking it was going to be probably as documentary-like as it is. And there are definitely some lulls in this, but also some really brilliant moments of peace and like subtlety that I think is really interesting to explore. And I think this is something that I think a lot of people will have a good time with, especially if, you know, you're looking at something so very unique in the world, and something so, I guess, you know, region specific as well. And the thing is too, is these older guys are kind of stubborn in the way that they are, especially keeping their old ways of, you know, keeping a lot of the secrets that they have. It's really interesting to kind of delve into that and seeing what their property lives look like, and then also just like their disputes and whether or not they're gonna take people on these truffle hunts and, you know, share their secrets. And it's almost like a dying art of some sort. So it's really interesting to check that out. And I honestly thought there was going to be more of this kind of duo of, you know, the animals plus the humans kind of, you know, just bonding. But it wasn't as present as I wanted it to be. But regardless, this is a great film. I definitely recommend people check it out. It's a 3.5 out of 5 for me, and something I definitely will revisit sometime in my older age, I'm sure. But yeah, Truffle Hunters was a good time, and I definitely recommend checking it out. All right, so now let's transition to Douglas Sirk, which I have actually been in a Douglas Sirk mood for the past like couple of months, and I've been slowly watching some of the things that have been trickling in that I didn't have from his colorized Technicolor obsession of films. I use the word obsession for a reason, but like All That Heaven Allows and Magnificent Obsession, Written on the Wind, I loved those films, and it was really cool kind of going back in time and watching some of his other lesser known B films, and then also just his last film, Imitation of Life. I really enjoyed that film and that adaptation. But now let's actually talk about one of his better B-side films, There Is Always Tomorrow. There's Always Tomorrow with, we have Barbara Stanwyck, who is definitely the MVP of this film, Fred MacMurray and Joan Bennett. I believe these two were together in Double Indemnity, which is one of the greatest like film noirs out there. But it's really interesting kind of seeing Douglas Sirk put his stamp on here, especially with Barbara Stanwyck. I think she is definitely, like I said, the main catalyst and the main reason why I love this movie. It's just how powerful and how tough and her presence is, and I just love how their duo of dynamic with Fred MacMurray. I think they're a really good duo. Not as good as I would like with Rock Hudson. Maybe as much. I love Rock Hudson probably the most when it comes to Douglas Sirk films. But when it comes to their like kind of chemistry on screen chemistry, I think this is a really great match made in heaven, and this is a really good B movie of sorts, if you will. And this actually came out in 1955, so just at the height of all the things that he had been doing. I think the 50s was Douglas Sirk's main decade, and definitely put out a lot of really great releases. But this is a really great romance. Definitely this, I forgot to say that Barbara Stanwyck is actually like the third woman in this love triangle. She's like an old flame of Fred MacMurray's, and she comes and kind of brings him out of his current situation. And so there's a little love triangle going on in this movie. But it's a melodrama, if you will, and if you're into that kind of stuff, definitely check this movie out. And I'm excited to jump into the next one, The Tarnished Angels, which I just picked up on my trip up to KC. And so, yeah, more Douglas Sirk in the making. But right now, this movie, solid 3.5 out of 5. I definitely enjoyed it, and Barbara Stanwyck is the biggest standout. All right, moving on from there is a classic from my, I guess, young adult life that I have seen many times, and I rewatched Step Brothers. I don't know why, I think it was just one of these random nights that I'm like, you know what, let's just put on a dumb comedy that I haven't seen in a while. And I put on Step Brothers, and I just absolutely adore this film. This has some of my favorite quotes and lines that I use to this day among my coworkers and friends, and I still use them to this day. You know, there's so much room for activities. One of my job, we track the amount of emails and texts and phone calls we make. It's good because I'm really good at it. But regardless, we use that line all the time about activities. So it's something that's I think it transcends the culture of the film itself. But it's a really dumb movie, and I just love John C. Reilly and Will Ferrell in this, and I think they're a really great match made in heaven. And I love the things that they've done together. And there's people who really either love this stuff or they hate it. But for me, it's one of those things that I adore and I will love for probably the end of my life. A big Adam Sandler, big Will Ferrell fan, big Monty Python fan. I just love dumb comedy. I think there should be more of it, and I appreciate the work that these guys do. But I would give this movie like a 4 out of 5. It's probably higher, honestly, because there's some things that I probably going back in time, thinking about how much influence this movie has in my life. But regardless, this is just a stupid fun movie, and I highly recommend it. It will not leave your mind if you open it up to a lot of the lines that they're saying to each other. All right, so now let's transition from Step Brothers to some horror films. I've watched a lot of folk horror films, and I also watched some horror adjacent things, some found footage things, and so I'm excited to talk about that. I got in a very particular mood, I guess, and I decided to actually rewatch some classics of folk horror genre, and two of them are two of the three legendary British folk horror films that started it all. Alongside Wicker Man, we have Witchfinder General, and we have Blood on Satan's Claw. So these are the 4Ks that I have from 88 Films, and these are terrific releases, by the way. These look terrific, but let's first talk about Witchfinder General from 1968, which is starring Vincent Price as Matthew Hopkins, which is one of the most legendary Witchfinder generals out there during the English Civil War, a time where it eventually carried over to America, to the Salem witch trials, and a lot of stuff is, I think is still a permanent stain on culture today, especially here in the States. But regardless, this is a nasty role from Vincent Price. I love him so much in here. He's so cruel at the same time, but he is also just so poignant and kind of slimy and smarmy, if you will. And I love how he is interjected into almost this romance story of this false woman being portrayed as a witch, and we have this young hero trying to stop it all, and it does not turn out the way you want it to. Not to spoil anything, but the way that it goes down, it is a nasty film from the 60s, and I really love how kind of, I guess, grotesque and almost natural that this film feels like. And I think it definitely captured more of reality than the fiction that is this medium most of the time. So I do think this movie is really, really highly important. I would probably give this movie a 4.5 out of 5. It's one of the classics for a reason. I think this is one of the best Vincent Price performances out there. He is absolutely a menace in this movie, and definitely a must-watch for people who are in the subgenre of folk horror. Now, the next film is probably one of the biggest folk horror films of all time. That is Blood on Satan's Claw, and this movie is from the early 70s. I think it's 1971 is when this came out. And I just adore this movie. Another, witch type of film, except in this case, the whole town is kind of infected in this weird occult going on in the background, especially with all these children in the background as they are slowly, disappearing or running out into the woods, making pacts with this demon. And I really love this film in particular as well, not just for the visuals, but also what it did for the horror genre as a whole. And I think the leaps and bounds that this film makes is quite extraordinary, especially when it comes to the subgenre of folk horror. And I loved this movie. It looks terrific in 4K. Apparently this was, I think, 3 short stories that were eventually put together into one film. And I think it actually works really, really well, and it all works together in this village. Piers Haggard, I think is how you say his name. Yeah, Piers Haggard is a terrific director for this project, and I love looking at all the special features in this particular thing. But yeah, I would say this movie is a 4.5 out of 5 as well. It's just a terrific double feature, and I'm just really glad that I finally got the 4Ks of these. Even if they are just the standard 4K editions, I don't really care I don't need the bells and whistles of slipcovers and whatnot. I just want the movies. So, but regardless, these are 2 of the greatest folk horror films of all time, and I highly recommend checking it out, along with The Wicker Man. So continuing down the folk horror path, I decided to watch a Deaf Crocodile release that I got. This is from 1980. It is a Russian release, and I was excited to watch this because I've heard good things about it, and I definitely was recommended by my friend Ryan, Disconnected, and that is The Savage Hunt of King Stock. And man, what a gorgeous looking box set, and just release in general, for kind of an underground Russian film that I didn't really know much about. And as somebody who has been really enjoying all the Hans Bjar's box sets and the folk horror sets in general, it's just really cool to see new life into a lot of these films that I honestly just feel like cult films. But anyway, it comes with a booklet, of course, this really nice booklet that has a lot of essays, and then it comes with a bunch of special features, actually, that I was able to watch some of it. It reminds me of like a Terry Gilliam-ish, there's some moments in Terry Gilliam, but it definitely reminds me of Night Creatures from Hammer. It also reminds me of Dracula in some parts, and then also like V, another folk horror tale that is quite insane. But I love the aesthetics of this movie. I mean, visually, this movie is a stunner. This is definitely probably the best part of this movie. Otherwise, it feels like a wild psychedelic trip of sorts. This movie is definitely a faux pas of sorts as well, where some of what you're seeing is definitely, is it fiction or is it reality? It follows this normal scholar. This is during what year is this? The 15th century. There's no films in the 15th century. As he goes to this castle looking at this legend of King Stock, and he finds this really decrepit master of the castle that gives this description and tells this story. It's quite an interesting tale, and I definitely recommend people check it out. I would give it a 3.5 out of 5. It's nothing spectacular. However, it is something that is worth watching, especially if you are into the subgenre of folk horror, and I definitely recommend people check out The Savage Hunt of King Stock. Now let's transition to some BBC classics, and I was so stoked to have finally watched these movies. Television programs, if you will. These programs that came out from the BBC at very different times, both incredibly influential. The first one is Stone Tape. This is Nigel Neal's Stone Tape. He is the one who did the Quatermass Experiment. I cannot talk. That he did for Hammer, and he wrote those scripts, and it's really interesting. He is a really prolific kind of science fiction writer during this time, and he did this really cool ghost story in the 1970s and the early 70s of this incredibly wild adventure that is the Stone Tape. And I really, really enjoy this release from 101 Films, which we'll talk about 101 Films here in a bit because there's more here. But this release has the actual script here, which is incredibly thick. But also it has a booklet, which has, them talking about the making of this, of course, and it has some postcards as well. This is a very interesting dynamic, and I love how influential this film in particular is. It's wild to think of these types of found footage type of TV programs where it almost is like, oh, hey, we're trying to hunt ghosts, and it becomes this thing that I can see, traject into the next thing we're going to be talking about, like Ghost Watch or, Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity. It just goes all the way through that gambit, and I just love and can't get enough of the time periods that these things come out in. But yeah, these are terrific. But anyway, here is the Stone Tapes right there, the 101 Films. So this movie, like I said, this is broadcast from the BBC on Christmas Day in 1972, and to critical acclaim, fusing science fiction with a supernatural horror. As you have probably noticed if you've been following on my channel, I've been watching a lot of British ghost stories, and a lot of them come out on Christmas, and I love that, and I'm going to start doing that as more of a tradition here, over here in the States for me. But this is just a terrific and almost terrifying release. It's not visually that terrifying, it's more of the concept that is terrifying. Capturing a spirit last kind of voice as they're in this space, in this decrepit old castle, looking through the ruins, and they're trying to figure out where this concept of this ghost that keeps appearing to some people, and also they just keep hearing things, but they just can't figure out what's going on, and they won't step out of this room trying to figure out what's going on in this. And so it's this deep dive, and it is very much a film that is very talky, and talks a lot about a lot of the things that are going on, and they're just trying to explain it with science and the best way possible. And I love that dynamic of the science versus the supernatural, and they play it really, really well in here. And that's credit to Nigel's writing and how great it is. But this is so influential, and I love the visuals, even if it wasn't that visually that horrific. It's really the sounds that scare me, and just the concept in general, and really going back to this time period that this came out in. It is just a great relic of its time, and I highly, highly recommend people check this out. I would probably give this a 4.5 out of 5. That's how much I loved this release and how influential I think this is. It's something I highly recommend people check out. If you are not familiar with this, go do yourself a favor. It's one of the best things put out on a television program ever, in my opinion. And speaking of 101 Films, we're not done just yet. And another television program that came out on Christmas Day, this time in 1992, which is Ghost Watch, which I just talked about this briefly yesterday because I told you I had picked it up. I finally watched it, and I watched the 50-minute kind of reimagining, talking about going back and thinking about what this was and how influential it was. Another thing that tricked a lot of people into thinking this was something that was actually happening, as it was programmed and presented as this television program, as they're going to this home, where these two little girls keep seeing this spirit that is messing with them, and this program is trying to figure out what the heck is going on in it, and pretty much just trying to debunk it, but also just trying to fill some air, if you will, on television. And I love the trajectory of this as well. It's another one where the sights aren't necessarily that terrifying, but the concept is. It is something that is very horrific, and the sight and thinking about what this could lead to. And like I had mentioned, I am a huge fan of stuff like Blair Witch Project, and I just watched Wreck. The ending of Wreck is really incredible. Things like Lake Mungo, these are all coming from the Stone Tapes, Ghost Watch. These are pieced together in different ways, and I love this doesn't feel old to me in terms of this concept, and I think it will evolve over time. You look at movies like Host, right, from the pandemic era, and thinking about that concept, I think it's just going to evolve through the different technology that we get. So like with Stone Tapes, I didn't mention, the recording was really, really important. This one, television was really, really important. Found footage with Blair Witch Project, obviously that camera pre-internet was really, really important. This is just a really fascinating concept that I am like in love with, and I adored Ghostwatch for that reason. But I love the way this goes, and it goes in so many cool directions. But it is pretty straightforward in terms of a ghost story where you are following this woman who's pretty much taking care of these children, or at least trying to cover what's going on in here. And there's these things out of the corner of your eyes that when you pan back with the camera, it just disappears, right? It's not that terrifying, but the concept, again, is. And that's why I love it so much. Another 4.5 out of 5. This is a movie that I am probably going to be rewatching. Another Christmas Day special for me. I'm in love with these things, and I hope you do fall in love yourself. So I wanted to be tangentially related. In fact, yesterday I decided, since I just watched Ghostwatch, I decided, you know what, this reminds me of something else that I just came out recently that I wanted to rewatch, and I had the disc on my shelf, but I just hadn't seen it since I saw it in theaters, and I'm talking about The Late Night with the Devil. So, Late Night with the Devil, this television program set in the 1970s, another film that is, this came out, I think a couple years ago, but it is a concept that is really, really haunting and effectively done, because it definitely plays on the medium itself of 1970s television, and they tap into that really, really well. So this film is from Second Sight, which they always put out these terrific releases, and this is just a great kind of late night television show with skeptics, right? There's people who are like fake prophets. There are people who are producers. There are psychics, and they're exorcised people in it. And there's also skeptics, right? There's skeptics who are involved. And then you also, actually, did I miss our main guy? I sure did. I missed him. I missed our host. And yeah, these are really cool postcards, by the way. I know that there's different companies that put this out. I think Umbrella put out this as well. But I always get the Second Sight because I just love them so much. But this has the 4K and the Blu-ray of it. But man, this is just a cool, like I said, retrospect of the 1970s, and thinking about that 1970s kind of TV aesthetic, the Johnny Carson types, or the late night types of, I guess, TV that people would be watching or tuning into. And I think the cool thing about this too is you're getting a kind of demonic ghost story in a way, but putting it out on this broadcast where it kind of transcends the medium itself, because you're like, oh, well, look at this audience that I have, and I can actually get exposed to many, many people. But this concept is really explored in here in a way, but also just having a delightfully fun time with it. That's the other thing too about this. This is like a very cheeky film that I think has a really light tone to it, but also some sinister things going on underneath, as you already kind of guessed with the name Late Night with the Devil. But it is a terrific film, and I had a really fun time revisiting it. I would definitely give it a 4 out of 5. It's a movie that's very retro to its time period, but also at the same time a great homage to the time period itself. So moving on from here to some A24 films. So I have been in a horror mood, so I decided to watch some horror films. One is a folk horror film that I had seen. I remember watching this in theaters and wasn't necessarily too impressed, so I was definitely excited to kind of revisit it. And I'm talking about the film Lamb, which is an Icelandic folk horror tale of sorts, where it is involving this lamb right here that has these humanoid, wow, I cannot talk, anthropomorphic, right, features that are very human-like. And we try to figure out what the heck is going on in this very isolated farm that is held by this couple as they are trying to figure out and trying to raise this kind of lamb child, if you will. But it definitely has some undertones of some things in the past that didn't work out, and you can definitely tell like they're putting all their effort into raising this lamb and not really exploring the fact that this is a crazy concept. And it kind of ends in a crazy way, but just like much A24 films, it's kind of becoming a little trite at this time, or at least predictable. Definitely some weird supernatural stuff happens kind of near the end, but I do still enjoy this movie, and I think Iceland in general, it plays a really incredible backdrop to something like this, as this emotional trauma that's going on with his family and losing an actual child, and putting all their effort into this lamb child, if you will, on top of a love triangle as well. And because there's actually a third member who shows up and is from their past, and definitely is a little in love with her. And I enjoyed it. I think it's a dynamic that I think will grow over time for me. Still, I don't love it, but it definitely, I softened up a little bit more than I did initially when I first watched it. So I would definitely give it a 3.5 out of 5. It's nothing new particularly, but it is definitely a cool concept nonetheless, and I definitely recommend people check it out. All right, so next is a film that really blew me away, and I actually had started watching this some time ago, but I kind of fell asleep, and I felt like I had this bad nightmare of a dream, mainly because this movie is a bad nightmare of a dream, if you will, and that is I Saw the TV Glow. This is a horror film that is going to make ripples in the future. I think this is going to be a classic. This movie is just so visually stunning, and also just something that I don't think I can fully understand, because as somebody who is not trans, this is what this film is at least trying to portray, or at least the chaoticness of that way of life and that living, or like kind of tuning in and out of these different channels, if you will. And I love the representation and the presentation here. I think it's just incredible visual style, and it's something that I just can't stop thinking about. And it definitely has some nodes to some previous programs in the past in television, and I love that aesthetic, that it actually gives that node to those things, but at the same time making this wholly original concept, but also remaining its identity in the fact that it shifts, it transitions, if you will. And I think it's incredible. I love this movie. It's really unsettling. The character work is really, really great, and I love the aesthetics of this movie. It's a great choice to watch. But if you want to be unsettled, or at least disturbed, but in a really positive way, in my opinion, definitely watch this movie. This movie is a 5 out of 5. It's something that I think is going to garner some kind of masterpiece here in the future. But yeah, this is one of the best horror films in the longest time for me, and I definitely recommend people check it out. Even if you don't like it, I still think it's a 5 out of 5. This movie is incredible. All right, so the moment a lot of you have been waiting for. Now we're jumping into the Columbia Classics Volume 4 set right here, this glorious box that comes with the 6 films, which I took out, and a booklet. And the booklet is actually right, I just dropped the movie, right here, which is a great booklet. Again, just like the other ones, they kind of just showcase the different films themselves, and kind of talk about the restoration, and the people involved. And I adore this, and I adore how a lot of these kind of modern takes, or at least looking at the films through a modern lens, or at least looking at it through the eyes of where we're at now, and like the influence and impact that these movies come from. And so I always just love that there is a great representation of different decades from Columbia's past, right, going all the way up to the 2000s, right? I think the latest film in here is Punch Drunk Love, is 2002 in this particular release. But so this one actually is a little older in that sense, because the last film that came out in this set was 23 years ago, which is insane. But regardless, let's actually talk about the films themselves, and this amazing box set. In fact, this is actually probably, I would argue, my favorite of the sets so far. I still have one more left. I have Volume 5 to talk about, so there is definitely some things to explore, but there is a sub-theme here with these particular films, and that is romance. And I am a sucker for romantic films. I mean, the Before trilogy is like some of my favorite pieces of art ever, and I love Blue Valentine, even if it's difficult to watch. I'm a big fan of just the different types of rom-coms that we're going to be talking about. And some of these are absolute classics in those rights. And so let's actually first talk about a classic film from the 30s, His Girl Friday. My God, is this movie a delight. This is a speedy comedy. This is a very speedy comedy. Howard Hawks directed this. This is starring Cary Grant. I almost said Hugh Grant. I don't know why. And Rosalind Russell, who are just this delightful pair here, who definitely are not meant for each other, but are they? As you go through this newspaper industry with them, as they are just spitballing back and forth. This is a screwball comedy, and a delightful one at that, and also just this really nice romance. And I think we wouldn't see something like The Apartment from Billy Wilder if this movie didn't exist. That's kind of how I see it. But man, oh man, this is like the third time I've seen this movie, and so it is a delight. But it's also, like I said, it's a record paced film because the lines they're throwing back at each other and they're talking over each other, and I just love that dialogue. It's so dynamic and it almost feels so realistic, and I just adore it. Actually, it comes with another film as well, which I'll just briefly mention. I believe this does. No, I'm thinking of the Criterion edition, The Front Page, which I think is I think this is the remake of that, but regardless, this is just an amazing film. This is a movie I highly recommend people check out. If you are into witty comedy, really great romance, sharp dialogue, and just that naturalistic element, this is one of the greatest classic films, and Howard Hawks just knocks it out of the park. And I just love this movie. It is just one that'll just kind of smack you in the face in the best way possible. But yeah, this movie, 4.5 out of 5. It's really that good. His Girl Friday, one of the classics for a reason. All right, so now let's jump all the way up to the 1960s to a really important film. And I just talked about Sidney Poitier not that long ago because he was in the previous volume. But now let's actually talk about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Probably his most famous work in terms of outside, if anyone's like a Sidney Poitier kind of fanatic, this is the thing that a lot of people know him from. And this is a really, really important film that came out in the 60s. 1967 in particular was an incredible year for him. And this is a movie about interracial marriage, and something that is incredibly important to today, and something where I think goes much deeper today than it does all the way back here, where this was pretty much like a faux pas. You cannot do this. This is something that will ruin people's lives. And it's really interesting because this is a movie that I think it can garner some criticism, especially in the modern context and lens. There's definitely some dated things going on in here. However, the concept is still really, really powerful, and it is incredibly, incredibly important. And I think this is a movie that, really showcases how much love you can put, or faith, I guess, faith and love in the other person, and not go at these characteristics and the stubbornness that we are as human beings, and the flawed characteristics that we have, and judgment, and kind of judging this concept of love. It's a really crazy concept, actually, speaking of, because these two do fall in love with each other. Sidney Poitier and Katharine Hepburn are, the two lovebirds, if you will, going to dinner to meet their parents. Spencer Tracy is the dad of Katharine Hepburn, but you also have, or Katharine Hepburn is the mom. Wow, why am I saying that? I said all that wrong, so go back. And it is actually, Catherine Houghton is the woman who is right there. Why can't I think of that? Katharine Hepburn is the mom. Anyway, regardless, they're going to dinner to meet their parents, even though they've only met each other, really briefly. And that was the crazy concept, is they met each other very, very briefly, and they're like, we fell in love with each other, let's get married. And eventually, his parents come over too, and it is this kind of neoliberalism parents from this time period where they're accepting of the civil rights movements, but at the same time, they're very hesitant of accepting it within their own context of their own family. And it is really interesting seeing Spencer Tracy, who has been playing all these amazing roles, especially around this time period. I love Spencer Tracy, and I love the things that he does, and I think he has some of the best dialogues in film history, mainly because of the platforms that he stands on. And I adore that for a particular reason, but he also is just a commanding actor. And there's no short of epicness between all of these people in this film, especially with Sidney Poitier, who is composed as ever, and also understands the demands of such a crazy concept, and also just deciding to jump into something like this is just an incredible thing. The fact that I'm talking about this for this long is a showcase to why this movie is that important. I would say this is a 4 out of 5, maybe even a 4.5 out of 5. It's an incredible one. It's something I think a lot of people need to check out. It's one of the best films of its era, and also it's still relevant to today, even if it has some blemishes. I think it's incredibly important to watch, and I definitely recommend people checking this movie out. All right, so next we're going to go to another romance film. This one's going to be a tough one. And we're going to talk about the subject of divorce, which was a huge thing around the time that this came out. And we're talking about Kramer versus Kramer, a film that I actually have been wanting to watch for a very long time. And I don't think there was a proper release of this movie up until this point. I don't think. If I'm wrong, I might be wrong. But regardless, I've been wanting to watch this because I knew this was the Best Picture winner when it came out. But this is starring Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep. And it also has Jane Alexander in it as well as a supporting neighbor who is fantastic. But pretty much it's these three, right? Their son and these two are getting a divorce. And it is a rather nasty divorce, or at least initially it feels a little soulless as we see Meryl Streep's character kind of just abandon this relationship and her son in a way. But as the film progresses, you notice that there's reasons why she did that, and she notices why she did that. But also you see Dustin Hoffman's character struggling with this concept because he thought he had his life together, and he's like, well, I guess I have to raise my son, and he fails in so miserably, but also at the same time in wondrous ways because he learns about himself and he grows. And you see through Jane Alexander's character, who is his neighbor, who's pretty much his confidant and best friend, as she also has a young child who is also taking care of somebody really, really young and like learning a lot about themselves. It just ends in this really fascinating court case that where she comes back and tries to take custody back of the kid. And it doesn't end the way you think it does, but it ends on this very uncertain note that I think if anyone's seen something like Before Sunset, this is a movie where that's a perfect ending for this particular concept, and also just the fact that this is so accurate to life, where there's no right answers, there's no right or wrong person, there's no better person than the other person. A lot of these things are really, really complicated, and this was done really, really well within this movie and this context. And I adore this for many reasons. There's moments you hate Meryl Streep's character. There's moments you kind of can't stand Dustin Hoffman's character because of his stubbornness. It's just great. And I highly recommend people check out Kramer vs. Kramer. It's kind of wild that I hadn't seen it up until this point. But again, I don't think it just had much of a physical media release. I would give this movie a 4.5 out of 5. I'm getting a lot of these movies but it's mainly because of how impactful these movies are to me, and a lot of these movies I have seen before. So regardless, go watch Kramer vs. Kramer. All right, so now let's jump into a 80s film that you wouldn't expect from John Carpenter. Let's talk about Starman, which recently I did talk about how I'm going to be watching the television series, which is the bonus disc on this disc and this edition in general. But this is a terrific film that you just would not expect from, like I said, John Carpenter, right? We have Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen, who are our main characters. Karen Allen is this widow who's recently just lost her husband, and we have this alien come down from space really nearby, kind of sees the pictures of, we have Jeff Bridges' characters as her former husband, and takes shape and decides to go alongside and try to learn about humanity through their relationship, and then also this weird road trip movie of sorts, as they're also being chased obviously by the government because it's an alien. This movie is just really fun, and honestly my brief description doesn't really describe it that very well, because this movie is horrific, it's comedic, and it's romantic, and all those things together are blended really, really well. And I think it's an incredible combination of that kind of the nuance of something that is so out of this world, if you will, that it does such a great job of it. And this movie is just a really fun time, and I am excited to watch the series, although I have been hearing some of my friends talk about it as it's not really that good. But I love the ending of this movie, and it'll make you cry. I don't think I've mentioned this, but most of these movies will make you cry. I definitely cried multiple times watching these things, but Another movie, I'd give this a 4 out of 5. It's definitely the most fun, I think, film in this particular box set, but it's not something that I would give. It definitely teeters towards a 4.5. It's between those times, but you know, John Carpenter is just a master at what he does, and somehow he made a really great romance film. Speaking of great romance films, let's talk about a classic from the 90s. In a lot of people in their minds, these two are two of the greatest kind of duos in this rom-com genre, and I'm talking about Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, and I'm talking about Sleepless in Seattle. This is a movie that I got some years ago. I have this weird, I think, Canadian edition, but now I have it on 4K, so I'm excited to have this. But a movie that I think also was kind of difficult to come out on Blu-ray, or at least was just not an odd one. Like, that's why I have the Canadian version, I believe. But regardless, this is a movie about this really weird concept in time. Going back to talking about some folk horror, thinking about, you know, something like Ghostwatch, where the time period that this movie came out, and looking at this idea of this radio talk show host hearing this guy's voice and this story of this guy who just lost his wife in a really terrible way, and having this young son who really just wants to have his dad back, because he's kind of lost his will to be around anybody. Anyway, he is on this air because the son pretty much forces him to be on there, talking about how he needs to get, you know, dating again and get life back going. And it's really funny because Meg Ryan, who is, you know, all the way across the United States in a different state altogether, is listening to this and kind of falls in love with his voice and his story, and tunes in when she can, because apparently he keeps coming back, or at least talking about this, as everybody across the country is like really fascinated by this love story, which is a really interesting concept, going, like I said, back to the 90s and during this time period where everyone was tuning into the radio. And this is just a kind of love at first hearing, I guess, if you will. This is a very romanticized edition of that, but it ends again in a way that is very will they, won't they? And I love that. And I think it is based on this very fantastical concept, but at the same time is grounded in this really delightfully cheeky way. Fun with it. I would give this a 4.5 out of 5. You know, this is just the state of the world. I'm just going to keep giving things like that to it. But yeah, definitely recommend checking out Sleepless in Seattle. Now let's transition to the last film in this box set, and is a perfect ending to this romance of 6 films. And now we're going to talk about this really awkward romance film, Punch Drunk Love. From PTA, Paul Thomas Anderson, one of the greatest American directors going on today, with Adam Sandler of all people. We have Emily Watson and Philip Seymour Hoffman and Luis Guzman in here. Wow, this movie is just a delight. This movie is really, really well crafted. It's a movie that obviously Paul Thomas Anderson, I just mentioned, is just somebody who really knows his craft and really understands what he's trying to go for. And it's wild to think of the thing that he made before this, which I think was Magnolia, which is this huge epic film with a bunch of cast, and it's this big ensemble of a film, this huge concept, and now he's stripping it down to this Adam Sandler kind of romance comedy of this guy who's a loser, falling in love with this other weirdo, and in the kind of sweetest way possible, in Emily Watson, who becomes obsessed with him. And I love this film, and there's a lot of you know, little trinkets here and there that people talk about, like with the Superman theory of this love story, and like the color palette of the film itself. It's just really fun because it's got a lot of red, white, and blue in it, and very much in this kind of American undertone. However, at the same time, you see something like Adam Sandler, who is, you know, somebody who's more connected to stuff like Billy Madison, Waterboy, kind of the SNL, 90s comedies where he's just this stupid bumbling idiot, and now he is this bumbling idiot but like likable kind of loser that falls in love and is the most powerful man in the room as he's talking to Philip Seymour Hoffman, who is also terrific as this nasty kind of underpinning sales sleazy guy as he talks on the phone. I love that scene. And then also when he confronts him, you know, being, like I said, the most powerful man in the room. This movie is a masterpiece. This is a 5 out of 5. This is like probably the best film in the bunch, in my opinion. However, I gave all the movies in this this bunch like a 4.5 out of 5. So it just tells you how strong this box set is and how impactful these movies are, and to my own life, and also just to the people who have visited these movies all their lives. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed my double feature of sorts, where I've talked about all the things that I've done the last 2 weeks. I'm excited to see where week 46 all the way up to 52 go through. But yeah, let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on these movies, and let me know what you've been watching. I would love to know. So I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.